Dismissed.
Okay, here we go. So, um, hello, this is my uncle Richard Cipher. Can you state your age?
83.
83. And how old were you during the civil rights movement?
Well, the civil rights movement was, as I understand it, goes from about 1954 to 1968 or so. So in that time period, I was, let's see, in the early 60s, I was in my 20s. So
Okay, and where were you
it's
living
good
at the
enough.
time?
I was in Chicago.
Mhm.
I was finishing up a PhD at Northwestern and also teaching English at Roosevelt University in downtown Chicago.
And what inspired you to get involved in the civil rights movement?
Well, I'd heard something about it, and then I don't remember how I learned this about this specific meeting, but I learned that one of the leaders of the Southern Christian Leadership Council, I think it was called,
Mhm.
SCLC, Bernard Lafayette was giving a talk somewhere nearby of an evening, and I went. And this was a very bright, very articulate young man, and he was talking about how he and others were um, beginning to conduct a voter registration effort in Alabama
Mhm.
and Mississippi, and where up till that time, Black people were basically not able to vote for one reason or another, mostly because local officials made it almost impossible for them to register. So this was a movement, a civil rights movement meant to assure that Black people could vote, as is, of course, their right under our Constitution,
Right.
they being citizens and so forth. And he talked about how they needed help. And when somebody asked what kind of help, he said, well, we can always use contributions.
Mhm.
He said, but we actually need people. We need people to come and join us in various places in the South and help with the registration effort and getting people to vote.
Mhm.
And specifically, he mentioned Selma, Alabama, where there were major efforts being made, and some became famous later on because of marches to Montgomery and Martin Luther King's engagement with this movement. And I was thrilled. Then around this must have been in 1963 or 64, because
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure that's when it was. Because there was also a Democratic convention. It was a presidential election year, and there was a Democratic convention somewhere. And I don't remember where the convention was. I did not go to it. But there was a woman in Mississippi named Fannie Lou Hamer,
Mhm.
who was an ordinary Mississippi woman. She was not well educated, but she was full of spirit and determination. And she and some friends formed something that they called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Not the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party in Mississippi in those days was controlled by old white racist types.
Mhm.
The Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party was composed of young Black activists. And what they did, among other things, was they went to this Democratic convention and they demanded of the convention leaders that they be seated as the true Democratic Party at the convention.
Mhm.
They wanted their delegates to replace the delegates from the official Democratic Party of Mississippi. And there was a big hassle at the convention, and there was a lot of publicity about it.
Mhm.
And ultimately, they did not get seated. They were offered 2 seats as at large with no votes. And they said, we didn't come all this way for that. Sorry, we get seated or we don't. And if we don't, we're going to let the world know why. And that's what happened. So in Chicago, meanwhile, a couple of young Black leaders formed a group called the Freedom Democratic Clubs of Illinois. Freedom Democratic from Fannie Lou Hamer's party, but we were just clubs of Illinois. We weren't a party. But the organization was basically to follow the work that Fannie Lou Hamer and others had started in the South and get Chicago residents registered. So I went, they had an office about a block and a half from Roosevelt University where I was teaching, coincidentally. So I went over there one day and said, hi, introduced myself. I said, I heard Miss Bernard Lafayette talk. I'm here to help. So they said, terrific, there's your desk. They were really in need of people to do stuff.
Yeah.
And I became actively engaged in that group. And we did significant research on how to get voters registered. We organized little groups of people to go to neighborhoods and door to door to get people registered. And it was a major effort in Chicago. Same time, what's going on in Selma is going on. And what's going on in Selma has become very prominent in the news because one day a few hundred people started to walk across the bridge from Selma to Montgomery. The bridge goes from Selma, the county in which Selma is, to the county in which Montgomery is. It doesn't go all the way to the capital, but it goes across. And they were going to make a march on Montgomery, which is the capital of Alabama, to demand changes in the voter registration system there so that their people could vote. The response of the locals in Selma was to get out the sheriff and the posse and other kind of white, what you'd call them, I guess.
Racist. White racist, white nationalist.
Well,
white,
yeah, and I'm trying to think of the word that I want. Taking the law into their own hands. What do you call it?
Right.
Yeah, there's a word for that.
Yeah, I'm this. I got
I'm
it. I'll get it
83. I'm not kidding it.
Vigilantes.
Anyway,
Vigilantes.
vigilantes. Very good. That's the word. Vigilantes and cops and sheriff's people confronted these people on the bridge after they'd gone a very short distance, and they started just beating them up with clubs and the butt handles of guns and so forth, and with fists. And some people got injured, and the march was stopped. There was no way it was going to continue. And the 200 or 300 people went back to Selma, beaten up and defeated, at least for them. But that basically just inspired. I mean, the irony of it all is that the way that the sheriffs and the vigilantes treated these people actually propelled the movement forward because it was so outrageous, and it got national television coverage. And the call went out. Bernard Lafayette said, we need people from all over the country. We don't need just the local Selma people to do this. We need help. We need people we don't care who you are. We don't care what you look like. You don't have to be Black. You don't have to be anything. We just need people who believe that what we're trying to do here is good. And so with a group of about 8, some of which were from the Freedom Democratic Clubs of Illinois, and a few other people in Chicago got together, and we went by train to Montgomery, and then from there to Selma to take part in what was ongoing as an effort there, as a protest. So that's how I got involved. That's a long answer to a short question.
No, that was awesome. Thank you. So the group that you traveled down there with, was it primarily men, white, Black?
It was a mixed. It was mixed racially, and the people were both women and men.
Okay.
One man was there. I got to know him very well.
Mhm.
He had his two daughters with him.
Mm,
One was about 18, one was about 14.
mm,
And he was bringing them to teach them some
mm.
stuff. You know, he was a
Yeah.
very nice guy. I liked him a lot. They were black, and there were a couple of people like me and a couple of graduate students
Mhm.
from the Chicago universities, one or another of them, and a couple of people, as I said, from our little office in Chicago. And we traveled as an integrated group.
So as you got down into Alabama, did how people would, because you were an integrated group, was there any like pushback or were
No,
no, nothing?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yes.
Oh, yes. Okay.
The we got off the train
Hmm.
in Montgomery, which is the capital, and we started walking through the station. The people from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference had arranged for a bus to get us to Selma, and we were kind of trying to find the bus or walking through the train station together. And we started drawing a bit of a crowd, a small crowd,
Mm,
but a crowd of hecklers. You
mm,
know, they were not used to seeing integrated groups of people.
mm.
And they were not especially used to seeing people who looked like they were going to go and make trouble. Somehow we looked that way. I still don't know. Maybe the mere fact of us being integrated was
Right.
the key to that.
Mm,
So they started calling us names, you know. Oh, look, there's one of them white niggers was taunted at me at one point. That
mm,
was the first time I'd ever been called a white nigger.
mm,
But they were talking about they didn't attack us violently. Nobody struck us or anything, but they yelled all kinds of things.
and that's intimidating.
Of course it was. Of course
Yeah,
it was. And
that's
I felt
intimidating.
especially bad for these two teenage girls, you know,
Hmm. Right.
who with my friend Jim, who was they were learning a lesson all right
Right.
about what it was
Right.
like in the South.
Right.
Um, so that was that was my initial exposure to Alabama. I had never
Segregation.
been in
Right.
Alabama before.
So where
Um,
did you stay when you were
well,
down there?
we did get the bus. The bus took us to Selma, and we were all split up, and we were all put up in the homes of Selma residents in the Black community.
Hmm.
I stayed in the home of a woman named Annie Lee Smith,
Hmm.
who was one of the women who was on that initial march along with her. She had a teenage daughter too, um, who took her, who she took with her on that march. And Annie Lee Smith had been beaten,
Hmm.
and I think her daughter had too, although I'm not quite clear about that in my memory anymore. And they were very nice people, and they accepted us immediately, and we felt at home there. And we were at home there. We stayed there with them for a week, about.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and that was where we stayed. It was right in the middle of near downtown, near the downtown Selma, where church buildings and the meeting halls and so forth were, and various stores and so forth. Um, but the center of the activity in Selma for us volunteers was a Baptist church called Brown Chapel.
Hmm.
And Brown Chapel was the place where we met and where we had meals. They had a small dining area, kind of a multi-purpose room in the basement of the church, which had a kitchen.
Hmm.
And they gave me and the rest of us, I got a card which I still have somewhere
Hmm.
that said Richard Cipher is a guest in Selma, Alabama, and is entitled to free meals.
Hmm.
So we ate our meals there. We had breakfast, lunch, and dinner there.
Hmm.
Annie Lee Smith didn't have to feed us, in other words.
Right. Right. Right.
Just had to put us up.
So had she voted before? Had she been
No,
able to register? Okay,
no.
she had not.
She had tried to register and had been rejected.
How old
That
was
made
she?
it very difficult. She was probably 50, I
Mm.
would say, at the
And she had
time.
never been able to vote.
Never. And until recently, I don't think she or her neighbors had even really tried very much.
Mm.
because it was so daunting.
Right.
The what you had was a situation where you went to the courthouse to register to vote, and you had to take a test.
Mm-hmm.
And the test was one that nobody could pass, really.
Mm-hmm.
How many registered voters are there in the 3rd Ward of Selma?
Right.
Nobody
Right.
in the whole
Right.
town can answer that question except maybe the registrar
Mm-hmm. Right.
of Selma,
Right.
and so everybody failed the test. I'm sorry, you didn't pass this simple civics test. We can't register you. Come back when you've learned more. And some people went back and went back and went back and went back, and with same thing, the questions changed, but they were just as difficult and really well nigh impossible. So the efforts to register that way were in vain. And also anybody who either did that, made attempts to register, or were involved in that march
Mm-hmm.
were usually accosted by somebody from the local sheriff. Jim Clark was his name.
Mm-hmm.
Nasty guy.
Mm-hmm.
His people, his deputies, would accost people and get their names and addresses.
Mm-hmm.
And why you want that? Well, we just want that. So they gave them. And this was so as to make life difficult for them.
Mm-hmm.
They needed anything in Selma, and their name was on that list. They didn't get it.
Right.
So not only didn't they get to vote, but for being protesters
Uh-huh.
and making efforts to vote, they
For
were,
having the audacity to want
yes,
to
exactly.
fulfill their right as a citizen,
Exactly.
they were penalized and sometimes killed. Right.
Well, they were beaten up at the bridge.
Right.
There were some deaths. There weren't that many deaths, but there
Okay.
were some.
Mm-hmm.
And they certainly were deprived of various kinds of civil services
Mm-hmm.
by being on this list. So it was a bad situation. And what Martin Luther King was doing, and he was really the guiding light for just about everything that was going on in the South. There were other organizations besides his, but he and other ministers like Ralph Abernathy, John Lewis,
Mm-hmm.
those people like that, very well known in the civil rights movement, they were the leaders because Martin Luther King, whose birthday I think is being celebrated
Right. Yeah. This is Martin Luther King
Monday.
weekend. Right. Right. Yep.
Hold on.
Oh.
I'm just walking through, sorry.
Oh. Okay.
Oh, you don't need it?
No.
Oh, okay. Anyway, his idea of how to do the protest was based in the system of nonviolence.
Mm-hmm.
The protest was not violent ever.
Mm-hmm.
There were no, I mean, this is a huge contrast to what goes on these days.
Mm-hmm.
There's no breaking into stores. There's no doing somebody just handed me a note. I'm ignoring it.
Okay. Somebody, some strange person in my house.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
how did you do that? What did you do down there? You trained in how to be
Yes,
to deal with
we
nonviolence.
had training in nonviolent protest. None of us had really had that
Right.
experience before. So we were really newbies
Right.
and untrained in this kind of activity. And the days were spent in small groups, broken up into small groups. We weren't the only ones that traveled to Selma. There were a few hundred of us there at least when I was there. And that number grew even larger as time went on. So they broke us up into fairly small groups of maybe 20 or 30 people, and some leader, Bernard Lafayette or one of his colleagues, would take us off and give us lessons in nonviolent behavior and how to respond if somebody taunted you verbally or spit on you or hit you with something, whatever you were supposed to do, how to curl up and try to protect your head you
Right.
know. So,
Wow.
how if you could take the blows up with your arms or your legs or your back maybe, but the rest of you learned how to protect ourselves from beatings.
Mm.
I didn't know how to do that.
Right, right,
What did I
right,
know?
right.
Um, and and the other thing that we did was we learned protest songs. We'd learned "We
Mm.
Shall Overcome" was the main one. That was the one that was sung regularly at group meetings, and we were told that as a group we were to have the kind of spirit that song exhibited, and
Mm-hmm.
we're certainly supposed to join in and sing it as loud as we could with everybody else.
Mm.
The various things like that we learned. And we were told that there was a march planned. We weren't given a date. They didn't know yet when it was going to happen, but they were going to make this march to Montgomery, and they were going to go all the way across that bridge this time, and they were going to go all the way to the state capitol. Now, this is like 30 miles.
Mm-hmm.
You
Right.
don't walk that of an afternoon.
Right, right.
You walk that over 3 or 4 days,
Mm-hmm.
maybe, which was the plan, which actually did finally happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and meantime, um, before that march took place, the federal government got involved because of the beatings that had taken place the first time. And there were federal officials, all increasing numbers of them here and there, to protect
Mm.
marchers from Jim Clark and his posse and the vigilantes.
So that was
We
Lyndon
had we had
Johnson.
we had
Lyndon
a
Johnson.
support
Right. So Lyndon
system.
Johnson sent troops there,
That's
National
correct.
Guard.
Just
Okay.
National Guard and I'm not sure exactly what their nature was, but that's probably what it was.
Okay. Did that feel comforting to know that they were there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. So it was during the day, it was training, and we all got to know one another, and it was a tremendous sense of community and
Mm-hmm.
unity of purpose and so forth. We all had very, very similar outlooks. Nobody was arguing.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's not good. We should do this. We'll beat the shit out of them. None of that. Nobody.
Right.
Everybody simply followed the leaders.
Mm.
I didn't
Do you
see
think
any.
that's because of the leadership of Martin Luther King? Do you
I
think
do.
it's because he set the bar and people rose to it?
He was a once in a generation, maybe
Mm.
once in a century human being. I think. I
You
still
got to
think
hear him speak?
I did. I
Mm.
did. Well, he was spellbinding, as everybody knows. Everybody
Right.
has heard the videos or seen the videos. The "I Have a Dream" speech, especially, is regularly trotted out, and it should be. It's a great
Mm-hmm.
speech.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and his whole purpose was not to get anything for Black people other than what they were entitled to.
Right.
Period.
Right.
No special treatment, no nothing. Just our rights, our
Mm-hmm.
right to vote,
Mm-hmm.
our right to sit down at a lunch counter, our right not to be discriminated against in job seeking, basic human rights within our system,
Right.
within the law of our
Mm-hmm.
system.
So at that point in Selma, segregation had been declared, Brown versus Board had been passed, but yet,
Brown versus Board was decided in 1954.
right, so but
10
yet
years before. 10 years before.
Alabama was still was still segregated.
They were finding ways around it.
Right.
Ways around it,
Mm-hmm.
Well, you go to your community school. Well, of course, the neighborhoods were all segregated. So there was really not much integration in the schools,
Mm-hmm.
even though Brown v. Board said that there shouldn't be segregation in the schools. They found ways to do it,
Mm-hmm.
or they would make something into what they called a private school.
Mm-hmm.
But the private school was for whites only, and it was funded by taxpayer money.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Right.
it was
Right.
outrageous.
Right.
There was
Right.
stuff that went
Right.
on that was really outrageous.
Can I
And
ask you
so
another
that even though
question?
that was the law,
Mm-hmm.
was not being complied with.
Right. And so in Alabama, I think So if you couldn't register to vote, you also couldn't serve on a jury.
Correct. Well,
Right.
that's right. That's right. You had to be, I think that's right. I don't
So,
remember whether juries was part of our, a part
well,
of
I
our
mean,
plan.
one feeds into the other. So then
Yeah,
if
it
you can't
does.
serve
It
on a
does.
jury, it's, no, you're not represented by a jury of your peers,
That's correct.
certainly,
That's correct.
Um,
And Selma, Alabama at the time was probably, and this is just an educated guess from my memory, was probably about 65% Black,
okay,
about
right.
maybe
So
60.
the majority,
A small majority,
right,
but a majority, not 51, but more like
right,
61.
right.
So that if they had been able to register for vote and run for public office and serve on juries, they would have been a significant component of the electorate.
Right. A big change.
So
Exactly. Oh,
exactly. So,
right,
and in
right.
fact, at the end of the day, once they did succeed in getting registered, suddenly Selma representatives in Congress were primarily Black people.
Right,
They only had maybe two in
right.
Congress, but
But still,
there had never been a Black person from the South
right,
in Congress.
right,
Never.
right, right.
So anyway,
So I know you
um,
didn't stay for the march because you had
I
to go
could
back
not
to
do it.
work.
I had 1 week.
Right.
I think it was a break or something at school. I
Okay.
had to go back and teach.
Right.
I couldn't just bag my job.
Right. But do you still feel like that week was so significant in just who shaped you as a person and just your part in like that historical moment in American history?
Yeah, it did have that impact on me. There's no doubt about it. The Martin Luther King is definitely one of my heroes.
Mhm.
Um, I don't have many of them, but he's one of them. Um, and I think that his approach to things was it succeeded where other approaches have not succeeded.
Mhm.
He got stuff done. He
He did.
got the support of all kinds of people.
Mhm.
It wasn't a fringe group at
Right.
all. It grew into this integrated, popular group that had that was respected.
Right. Right.
Wow. You know,
Mhm.
um,
So when the march finally happened,
yes.
did you watch it on TV where you're like,
Oh,
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Followed it closely because I was still back in Chicago, still
right,
active in
right,
Chicago politics.
yeah.
Um,
Must have felt like so gratifying
oh,
to
it was
just,
wonderful. It was wonderful. I was crying
yeah,
when
right.
Martin Luther King made that speech on the steps of the
Hmm.
Montgomery courthouse.
Yeah,
Oh, it's just incredible.
right,
This is what it led to.
right.
And then, of course, the the
Voting Rights Act in 1965, right?
Voting Rights Act, made it impossible for these guys to do all the shenanigans that they've been doing.
Right,
They
right,
they had to register these Black people, even though they didn't want to.
right. And that changed everything.
It changed everything. It really
Right,
did. It
right.
was a huge pivotal point in the history of our country.
Did you keep in touch with Annie Lee Smith?
No,
Oh, okay. I mean, obviously
I
we
never
didn't know.
did. I
Okay,
did write a
okay.
I did write a poem about her.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, but I never. No, I didn't remain in contact with her. Bernard Lafayette was in Chicago from time to time, and I remember seeing him occasionally in the future. Uh,
Okay.
but none of the other people from Selma were people that I ever saw again, really.
Mm, interesting.
Except
And
for that guy, except for the guy with the two teenage daughters, because he started coming around to the Freedom Democratic Club office and
okay,
participating.
okay. So you stayed friends with him,
Yeah, stayed friends with him. But then when I left Chicago,
right?
a couple of years later, that all vanished.
Well, it was so different back then because we had to call, it wasn't like so as easy as it is now to keep in touch with
No, no, no,
cell phones, and
nowhere
you
near.
wrote letters back then, right?
Yeah, yeah, and long distance calls were expensive.
So his daughters that marched,
Yeah,
did they have did you ever speak with them about their experiences? Did
no,
they stay for the actual march?
I don't know. whether they
Okay.
did. I don't remember
Okay.
whether they did.
Okay, we only have 5 minutes left before,
Okay.
and I can't upgrade
Okay.
to pro. So, Mike, what would you like the generation now to understand about the civil rights movement and its impact on society today? Is it
Well,
still important?
I think it ought to be important. I'm not sure that my thoughts about it are mainstream anymore. This was a movement that was meant to integrate society,
Mhm,
whereas what I see now is more tribalism going on and people being separated according to race and
mhm,
gender and so forth, and they're all off in their little tribal groups fighting with one another. To me,
mhm,
that's not productive at all.
mhm,
I am a big proponent of our being a country, not a group of identitarians. We
mhm,
are all Americans, and the idealism behind what Martin Luther King was trying to accomplish seems to me just as relevant now and
mhm,
always will be,
mhm,
because to me it's the right idea. It's the right way to go about building and sustaining and progressing as a society.
mhm,
I think what's going on these days is counterproductive. So my thought is that, I guess my thought for your students might be that a look at Martin Luther King's way of doing things and what it accomplished might be a good lesson, because some of the stuff that goes on today in the name of civil rights, it doesn't seem to be producing very much except antipathy.
All right, let's do it.
Oh, is she talking to us? No. Okay. I thought Tori was talking.
Yeah, she was saying something. I don't know what.
Uh,
She wants me to end it.
okay. Um, okay, so thank you so much for this
Okay.
interview and this one recorded because I can see it's recording. And I really value your time, and I love that you were able to share the story again. So I know that it was
Yeah,
twice, but hearing it twice was even better. And it's such a pivotal moment in American history, and for
it
you to have
really
been a part
is.
of
It
it
really
is
is.
just amazing.
I hope it's taught in the. Does anybody teach history anymore?
I teach it. I teach it in my English classes. So, and I just picked up this other class. So this is where I'm using this video, and I'm just doing the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we're talking about the civil rights movement and its
Yeah,
effect on today. So,
there have been complaints that things that relate to Black people have been not featured in the way we teach American history, which I think is ridiculous. Slavery has to be taught.
mhm,
The civil rights movement has to be taught.
right,
One was this horrible blemish that stains our society still.
right,
The other is this extraordinary
mhm,
progress
mhm,
that made a giant step
right,
in atonement and getting rid of the stain of
right,
slavery.
right, right,
And
and just leading people.
unless you do
Right,
history, you're not going to know that.
right, right. No,
Too
no,
much, too much stuff today it's like the earliest thing that we have to worry about was something that happened last Thursday.
right.
History is just last week or maybe the end of last year, but
Mm,
anything that happened before that is worthless.
mm. When you were in middle school, were you interested in history?
Oh, I loved it.
You did,
I
yeah.
did.
You and
Yeah.
Frank both, yeah.
Yeah, sure. I
Yeah.
loved history. It was one of my favorite
I
subjects.
think it depends on the teacher too,
I guess so.
if
Well,
you have a
I had
motivating teacher.
one guy in high school who was a wackadoo,
Oh,
and
okay.
another guy who was terrific. So
Right, right,
guess
right, right,
which one
right,
I preferred.
right. But you know what I tell my students too? I tell them it's not just what you learn in school. It's like you have to educate yourself
Oh
also.
yeah. Oh
You have
yeah.
to, part of being a citizen is being educated and aware and
Yeah.
knowledgeable about what's going on in the world. And that, listen, they have it
Absolutely.
so easy. They just pick up a phone. So, well, not easy, but you know what I mean.
Well, yeah.
To get
Of
news
course.
is certainly easier than
We
it
could go
was.
on for a long time talking about social media pros and
Right,
cons.
right, right. That's what I mean, because sometimes it's not good. Right,
There are plenty of both in social
right.
media.
Okay, well, my time is just about to run out, but I love you
Okay.
so much, and thank you so much for sharing the story. It really is, it's just meaningful to me as your niece, and also I'm very happy to share it with my students too. So thank
Great.
you so much, and I love you.
Love you too, Laura. Take
Okay,
care.
bye.
Bye.